Israeli Americans has filed a civil rights lawsuit against Airbnb in the United States, alleging that the company has enacted a policy of discrimination based on religion due to its recent decision to remove the settlement listings from its vacation rental property website. The lawsuit was filed in the District Court for the District of Delaware under a federal statute that safeguards against discrimination in housing sales in the rental market. The lawsuit asks that the court enjoin Airbnb from discriminatory practices against Israeli Jewish homeowners and seeks monetary compensation for ongoing lost rental income from Airbnb. The plaintiffs are 12 Jewish American citizen families who own properties in Israel and one U.S. citizen who has utilized Airbnb's services to rent properties in the affected areas. Reporter Mark Weiss spoke with Professor Eugene Kontorovich, the head of the Kohelet Policy Forum and a law professor at George Mason University in Virginia. He asked him if the Airbnb decision to remove listings from Jewish settlements was illegal under Israeli and American law.
Yeah, it's obviously a form of ethnic and religious discrimination. Of all the people in the world that are allowed to list on Airbnb, only Jews in Judea and Samaria are barred from listing. Their Arab neighbors can list. So what this is a clear discrimination, which I think violates both Israeli anti-discrimination laws and American anti-discrimination laws.
If that's the case, then Israel advocates, or indeed the state of Israel, should pursue legal action against the company, maybe on a federal level in the U.S. or in the Californian state where Airbnb is based. They can pursue action in many fora. In New York State has a very strong anti-discrimination law. The legal action, however, is slow, and while it's very important to assert legal rights, it's also important that political actors in America respond by treating this as what it is, a form of discrimination. Just like government employees would not be able to stay at a hotel that engages in housing discrimination and discrimination on ethnicity, so Airbnb should be subject to the same treatment. And also, many states, about a dozen states in America, have laws banning their pension fund from investing in companies that boycott Israel. And Airbnb has quite clearly declared a boycott of Israel and Israeli territories. And that should subject them to being barred from having state pension funds invest in them when they make an initial public offering next spring. Do you believe such a campaign against the company would force Airbnb to rescind its policy on the West Bank?
I think it's quite possible because it's quite clear that their policy is not based on any ideological conviction. They have been pressured for many years to boycott Israeli communities by the BDS campaign. And as they say in their statement, they've been pressured for many years, and their response was, this is lawful under American law. We don't boycott anyone anywhere based on whatever the political situation is. We're just a platform that provides services for everyone. And they told the BDS movement to get lost. And then they were lobbied much more aggressively. They were targeted by the UN Human Rights Council for another 2 years. And finally, they reversed their prior position of saying we're going to do business anywhere where it's legal to do so. So just like they reversed their position once because of pressure, greater pressure is likely to lead them to reverse that reversal.
Would you urge supporters of Israel to boycott Airbnb?
A consumer boycott is a feel-good symbolic measure that is unlikely to work in the long term. Given their market power, it's unlikely that consumers are going to really have the discipline to stick to such a boycott. And while it's a nice symbolic message, it's much more important to urge both Israeli and American governments to take legal and regulatory action, treating it as a company that is engaged in discrimination.
Do you think there is a danger that other tourism sites, such as Booking.com or TripAdvisor, will also take a similar action?
Well, they're certainly being targeted, and that's why it's particularly important for this case to be resolved in a good way.
Now, you mentioned
all of these bookings, of course, all of these websites, all of these travel sites provide travel services in occupied territories around the world, Western Sahara, Northern Cyprus, in some of the most brutal regimes in the world. You can get, an Airbnb and Booking. You can reserve a place in a home in Gaza used for launching Hamas missiles. That's completely okay. So this is the one case that they exclude.
You mentioned earlier the UN Human Rights Council preparing a blacklist
against businesses that occupy in the West Bank. And of course, that organization as well also ignores other areas of the world that are classified by the UN as occupied territory.
Yeah, so the UN Human Rights Council says it's about human rights, but it takes this issue, doing business in territories that it considers occupied, and it only seems to care about it in one place in the world. That suggests it's not about human rights. It's not about international law, because international law is international, and human rights applies to all humans. But there's only one kind of humans they seem to care about, and there's humans that are involved with Jews.
So would you go as far as to say this is a form of anti-Semitism?
So anti-Semitism is a loaded word to use because people say, oh, it can't be anti-Semitic. These are very nice human rights people. Look, they talk about human rights. So anti-Semitism is not a matter of, necessarily intent. Most people think that they're not biased or bigoted or discriminatory. They think they're doing the right thing. So it's very unlikely that the people behind this think of themselves as anti-Semites. But I think having a policy that discriminates amongst Jews in their historic homeland, in the area where they constitute, where they primarily live, and singles them out from all other peoples in the world, it's very hard to describe that as not being anti-Semitic in effect.
Professor Eugene Kontorovich, head of the Kohelet Policy Forum and a law professor at George Mason University in Virginia. Charges have been filed